Then you had this meeting this morning, this kind of White House Situation Room meeting on Iran that wasn't previously declared, where they were talking about it. And then Witkoff comes out again and says, do you know what, actually, no, we need zero nuclear enrichment, and that's where we stand at the moment.
Well, we started the day with a potential bit of good news, or a good indicator from JD Vance, the US Vice President, about how he feels quite optimistic about the chances of a UK-US trade deal. Exactly what will be in it is another matter of conversation. But that lifted spirits somewhat, I'm sure, within the UK government. And Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, has been further talking about trade deals, obviously in light of the tariffs introduced by Donald Trump. Here's what she had to say at the White House press briefing earlier.
There have been many talks with countries. We've had more than 15 deals, pieces of paper put on the table, proposals that are actively being considered. And as we've said consistently, more than 75 countries have reached out. So there's a lot of work to do. We very much understand that, but we do believe that we can announce some deals very soon.
I don't think that's moved on from last week, has it? The sort of 15 trade deals put on the table, although she did say more than 15, so maybe it's increased somewhat. Could the UK trade deal be amongst them? When do you think we may start to hear a little more substance to that, Josie?
Yeah, so what was interesting is Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, was speaking to reporters, and the Wall Street Journal reported today that there's a kind of prioritising of deals between a handful of countries. So the suggestion was Australia, South Korea, India, Japan, and then the UK was actually in these set of countries. So, you know, there is all these indicators now coming from the US, including Vance in this sort of very indirect way through a interview with a British publication, that's suggesting that you know the UK is going to be on the forefront of this. And obviously we have Chancellor Reeves going later this month to Washington DC for the IMF spring meetings with other finance meetings. So I mean, it could come before then, around then, something that's to be discussed then.
OK, all right. Well, we'll watch that space. Meanwhile, a story that may need a bit of explaining, but is certainly taking up a lot of column inches over there, is Donald Trump lashing out at Harvard. He has slashed the university's funding by over $2 billion after Harvard refused to meet the administration's demands on anti-Semitism, DEI and immigration. The former President Barack Obama accused Trump of stifling academic freedom. Caroline Levitt, we just heard from her there. She also spoke about this earlier. She doubled down on the administration's positions and claims that Harvard has allowed anti-Semitism on its campus and broken federal law. Can we just explain this one a little further by talking about sort of exactly what the demands were and why Harvard decided to stand against them?
Yeah, so this was very far-reaching and wide-reaching. So most of these are coming from the Task Force Against Anti-Semitism, which is run by the Justice Department. And they delivered a kind of vague set of demands several weeks ago, and then on Friday set a much more specific set of demands. But again, they were very wide-reaching. I mean, it was a ban on pro-Palestine student groups. It was, you know, looking at the acceptance of international students who've been hostile to American values, and then all the way from committing to fully cooperating with the Department of Homeland Security, which is the department which has been, you know, arresting students on the spot and trying to deport them. And then you have things like wearing masks on campus, and eliminating what they call DEI here, which is diversity and equality initiatives. And there's even one demand to crack down on plagiarism without any kind of reference on whether this is actually a widespread problem. So you can kind of see how for some of these, they're hard targets to reach. And, you know, Harvard's president came out and said yesterday in a statement that this is a massive overreach by the federal government, and it would compromise what is a private university's independence.
But it's not private in the sense that it does receive federal funding, but is that federal funding attached to specific programs like the Joint Task Force to combat anti-Semitism?
Yes, I mean, what's interesting is if you actually drill down into where, I mean, let's just kind of put this into context, is that Harvard is the oldest and wealthiest university in the US. So its endowment fund last year was $53 billion, which, you know, someone pointed out is higher than the GDP of about 100 other countries in the world. So, you know, this is a drop in the ocean. But if you actually look at what the federal funding goes towards, I mean, 7 of the $9 billion that is now set to be cut goes to affiliated hospitals. So if you think about Boston Children's Hospital and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Harvard said that the remaining $2 billion of the 9 will go to research grants directed by Harvard. So that includes space exploration, diabetes, Alzheimer's, tuberculosis, things like that.
Okay, but the main beef really is that Harvard is saying that no government should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they could admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. So it's that tussle, isn't it, between independence and educational institutions, particularly further education, being protected, allowing students to be protected in terms of being able to hear all different kinds of ideas and to take part in all kinds of conversations without sort of fear of breaking the law or of coming up against the administration. Where does this go from here? So basically Harvard is sticking firm, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, many educators kind of see these demands as a pretty thinly veiled effort to kind of curb academic freedoms. I mean, Trump has previously criticized these Ivy League colleges, most of which are in blue, democratic states, as being too woke and kind of governed by this left-wing ideology. And he sees these universities as kind of synonymous with anti-Semitism, what he sees as violent pro-Palestinian protests on campus, like we saw last summer, elitism, suppression of free speech. And so, people like Harvard president are saying that the anti-Semitism accusations, I mean, he himself is actually Jewish, says this is a bit of a smokescreen. And it's important for them to draw a line in the sand on this because, they said that they've done all they can to combat anti-Semitism, but yet still, we've seen with Columbia that they have had their federal funding temporarily withdrawn, even despite capitulating to these demands.
Okay.
So, I mean, it depends what with each college, how much they depend on federal funding. Harvard, not so much. Princeton has taken a bit of a stand, and they have a healthy endowment. MIT filed a lawsuit yesterday, actually, against the Department of Energy over its funding. And one lawyer, interestingly, said it would be a turning point in the president's rampage against American institutions. So
I was going to ask that actually, how whether Harvard's pushback may well inspire others, whether this is the start of it. I mean, Donald Trump has also been threatening to look at Harvard's tax-exempt status as well. So there are other levers he can pull. So we should expect to hear more of this. But could this be a start of a pushback, particularly in those sort of protected institutions, as many people will see them? Should we just talk briefly about the US softening their demand for Iran to end their nuclear program? Here's what Trump's press secretary Caroline Leavitt had to say on that.
The president has made it clear he wants to see dialogue and discussion with Iran while making his directive about Iran never being able to obtain a nuclear weapon quite clear.
Okay, what do we understand is happening here, Josie?
So we're obviously, our listeners will probably be aware, but we're between two talks. So we had Amman last weekend, we've got Rome on Saturday, and there's a lot of carrot and stick going on here. So, I mean, in the US, you have these two schools of thought. So Trump has two sets of people in his ear. He has the kind of Steve Witkoff special envoy and J.D. Vance voices in his head who are kind of chasing this diplomatic route. I mean, they're very keen to not escalate things. And then you have people like Waltz and Rubio who are Iran hawks and China hawks and they want a maximalist approach. And Trump is kind of equivocating between the two. So he goes back and forth between saying he's going to bomb them 1 minute and then one Netanyahu in the White House, don't you dare, conduct direct military action. If you do, we want absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, Witkoff was briefing Fox News last night saying that the US kind of had softened its position and, they were looking at this level of enriching uranium at 3.67%, which for those of us who've been paying attention is the exact same level permitted under the one that Obama agreed in 2015 and then Trump later ripped up. But then you had this meeting this morning, this kind of White House Situation Room meeting on Iran that wasn't previously declared, where they were talking about it, and then Witkoff comes out again and says, "Do you know what? Actually, no, we need zero nuclear enrichment, and that's where we stand at the moment." And he said any deal that's done is Trump's deal. When it's not clear yet what happened between, Monday evening Witkoff and Tuesday afternoon Witkoff. But I mean, obviously Netanyahu would be Netanyahu's line in the sand, would be, allowing for any kind of level of nuclear enrichment. He said as much at the White House.
Yeah, okay. Look, thank you for bringing that to us. We'll see where we end up. Well, where Witkoff is by tomorrow, shall we, Josie? Josie Ensor, the Times US correspondent, thank you for bringing us our nightly edition of the Trump Dump.